So on a Friday afternoon to see this many people come out and the amount of people that responded is a reflection of you. Well done.
A week ago I emailed Jenny and I said, you know, if nobody signs up to come at 3 p.m. on a Friday, I would totally understand if you need to cancel.
She said if there's less than 10 at that moment. I was like, lady, there's 28 and growing, so you're coming up here. Get ready for the drive. So here we are. We do have the book here. I know a couple of people already purchased a book, and it was hilarious just standing out in the front right now and watching the snow and realizing, yep, it's gift time. It would be a great gift. Mary has graciously agreed to sign some copies, so after our chat here, if you want to stick around, if you want to purchase a book, we'd be happy to take care of that for you. Just a quick reminder, if you have a phone, if you could turn it off, not even just on vibrate, if you could turn it completely off, we'd appreciate it. And we'll dive in. Hi, Mary.
Hi, Jenny.
How are you?
I'm fine. I'm impressed by how many people are sitting on bolsters here. That was another thing I worried about. I said, are they going to have to sit on the floor? Really? So thank you for doing that.
I'm sure many people in the room know about you as a writer. Maybe some of you has followed her column forever. I did. But I wanted to jump right in and ask you about your yoga journey, because not a lot of people know that you teach yoga and that you have this beautiful practice and these beautiful teachings.
You know, I started toying with yoga right after I graduated from college in California. And there was no big yoga culture in the United States at that point, but this was California. And I had a friend who had a little paperback book called Richard Hittleman's 28-Day Yoga Plan. And so I'd go out drinking with my friends, and then I would come back about 2 a.m. and go, I'm going to do some of that yoga. And I'd find Richard Hittleman's 20, you know, and I'd read about triangle, and I'd prop it open on the floor, and I would just, you know, I'd try to do these poses. And then, you know, I started running, and there was still no big yoga movement. And then when I turned 40, I went and I sat at a coffee house called Coffee Chicago, and with a yellow legal pad, and I made a list. It was actually the New Year's Day right after I turned 40, and I was going to make my resolutions list. And I sat there and I wrote, number 1, do yoga. And I thought, what does that even mean? This was 1994, and there still was not much yoga going on. So I went and I found a little studio called Wild Onion Studio in Sheffield, and I went to a class. There were 3 people in the class, and I came out and I went, oh my God, I don't know what that is, but it's good. And it just started from there. I just found something in it, and it deepened and it grew. And then I met Quinn. He was one of my early teachers, and Tom, one of my early teachers. We were all young. And when they founded Yogaview in 2003? 2002. They asked me if I'd come teach with them, and I still remember running into Quinn's mom when the studio was about to open, and I'm coming up a sidewalk, and she says, oh, are you the yoga teacher? And I turn and I look over my shoulder and think, who is she talking to? Because I'm the Chicago Tribune writer. I didn't identify that way, and yet somehow.
And here you are.
Here I am.
So almost 20 years later, and now we had to convince you to teach yoga online. There's a lot of time between when you started in the original Yogaview and where we are now.
Right. Right, and I was a little hesitant about teaching yoga online just because I thought, oh, is that going to work? Who would come? I always have the who would come question. And am I equipped to teach that way? I was amazed by how quickly it came to seem normal. There are a couple people here. Michelle started taking yoga in my yoga Zoom class. Lauren started taking yoga in my yoga Zoom class. And really, to my surprise, even though lacks some of the things we love about yoga, the beautiful studio, the touch, the being able to see each other. A real community has been able to exist, and people have been able to get the essence of what we want out of that practice, which is to come together and move and breathe and just take a little recess from the stress.
How would you say that both your own personal practice and your teaching practice has evolved over a 20-year time span?
I love that question because, I also teach yoga at the DePaul Theater School, so I teach a lot of young people. They're like in their 20s, most of them. And they remind me of how I was when I was in my 20s, even though I wasn't doing yoga, right? It's like, there's a lot of go, 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 push. And when I was in my 40s and started doing this, I was still very go, 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 push. It's like I wanted the hard practice. I wanted to sweat, I was coming off running, and, I wanted to feel. And then little by little, partly because I met different teachers, partly because I got older, I just realized I didn't have to push so hard. That I didn't need to put my feet behind my head or whatever crazy thing I thought I needed to do. I think it's a very common journey among yoga teachers that it's like you expand your notion of what doing yoga is. And you learn that there are many adaptations to it, and that the person with the most dramatic poses is not the person with the most useful yoga practice necessarily. So that's what I think. I'm just softened into what a yoga practice is.
Do you have a favorite yoga pose?
I really like half moon, though I find myself more and more liking the poses on the floor. Lying back over the bolsters feels better and better to me.
In your personal practice, you one of the things I read about you, you referred to your morning mind. That you sometimes have some moments in the morning where the mind is really fresh, and I know that you're a big walker. Yeah. That you tend to take a lot of walks. How has your yoga practice infiltrated both your meditation and maybe your walking? Maybe walking is sort of a meditation practice for you too.
Yeah, I actually think of walking as part of a yoga practice. That some days it makes more sense to go take a walk than to go sit on your mat. And I think that's part of what a yoga practice can do for you, is to help you make that choice. When is the day that going outside and taking the walk is the better thing to do? I am a huge believer in the power of morning and not squandering your morning, that what you do with your morning sets the tone of the day. I screw that up sometimes, Going online as your first act of the morning is almost never the good thing to do. Even when you think you need to, and I was a journalist for 41 years, and once the internet came along, there was just this, oh my God, I have to see what's happening. What's in the news? Who's saying what? Who's arguing? And I really had to train myself in the past few years, even with a deadline coming on, to not let that be the first thing I did. To go read a book, to take a walk, to do some yoga. And so, the other part of your question is how is yoga affected? What was your question, Jenny?
Well, let's say, do you in the morning mind? Do you practice in the morning? Do you take a? Well, I guess you.
I often do. I mean, it's like sometimes I practice in the morning, sometimes I don't. I love to practice in the morning, but sometimes it's in competition, you know, real life time competition with some other things that I also think would help me to go about the rest of my day. I mean, and that's the whole point of the yoga, right? It's to help you. I mean, there's the pleasure in the moment of doing it, but there's also how it helps you use the rest of your time, how it helps you make your choices about what you're going to do for the rest of your time. So sometimes, you know, I recognize that I am better off going to take a walk and leaving my yoga till later.
Or just allowing that to be the yoga, I think.
Or allowing that to be the yoga, right.
Yeah. I like what you said about taking the time to just let everything distill so that you know what you need as opposed to just diving in.
Right.
All right. You're obviously a writer. We have this beautiful book. How does your yoga practice and your writing practice, do they intersect?
I started doing yoga shortly after I started writing a column. And I think it was just some survival mechanism for me. That I knew I needed to find something that was going to allow me to put up with a specific set of stresses that come. You know, there's writing, and then there's writing a newspaper column. They're related but not identical. And, you know, writing a newspaper column is, you know, 3 days a week. You've got to do this. You have no choice. You do it or you don't get paid. You don't get paid, you don't eat. You know, so you've got to do it. And you got to do it for publication, meaning for the public, and then a lot of people are going to have an opinion about what you wrote and an opinion about you, and they're going to let you know. And I just knew I needed something that was going to let me just kind of breathe through the constant deadline and the constant living in public. So that's one way that yoga has affected how I write. And then shortly after I started doing yoga, I ran into a former colleague of mine in the Whole Foods parking lot, and she asked me that question for the first time. She says, "How do you think yoga affects you as a journalist?" And I hadn't thought about it until she asked. And I said, actually she said, as a journalist and a columnist. And I said, I think that for better and worse, in some ways, it's made me less ready to judge, less quick to condemn. And, you know, that's a little problematic in column writing, right? I mean, because you're kind of expected. That's the model, is to find the things you hate and condemn them. And it just, yoga just made me think through how you verbalize the things that you think are bad. You know, that the language of hate, the quick condemnation, the stuff of which columns are so often successfully made, really seemed at odds for me.
I think what you're describing, you graciously described, you know, this basically judgment, that you're judged 3 times a week, that you're putting something out there that you know people are going to judge you and have an opinion. And I'm sure with the rise of email and the internet, suddenly it's splashed everywhere. But this ability to kind of step back, I think your charm as a writer, why you connected with so many people, was you had the ability to see things clearly and with kindness. And that's such a tenet of our yoga practice, is to not judge and to come at the practice with this hand of kindness. And I think that was really reflected. I think that's why so many people, right, like really found a voice in hearing what you had to say.
Well, thank you for reading it that way.
Yeah, it's really beautiful.
And you know, and I think for all of us, there is a quandary that we face. You know, where does our desire to be kind and our desire to be fair meet our desire and our obligation to speak out against things that are wrong? Mm-hmm. You know, there's just always. I think what yoga has helped me do, not yoga alone, but it's part of the process, is just to pause. Yoga is a way of helping you pause and just reflect before you do that.
Well, and that yoga is such a these union of opposites, right? So I can't help but think about the balance of effort and ease. And someone described you in a little research about you as a restrained and even approach, that you have a restrained and even approach. And that sounded really yogic to me. But our practice is so much about finding a balance, whether it's on your hands, on your feet, on your head, a balance of effort and ease. And in so many ways, you were able to find that as a journalist.
But I do want to say something about that. It's like finding balance and finding ease is not easy. That, sometimes some people say to me, "Oh, you're so calm." I go, "No, I'm not." It's like really, it's just the process of learning the discipline of learning to pull back for a moment from the roiling that's going on. Let it settle. It's like taking the pot off the burner, right? And just letting that water settle for a minute. That doesn't mean that the pot doesn't boil.
In an interview I watched the other day, someone asked you, what keeps you writing? And you answered, a profound curiosity about the endlessly fascinating world. And I thought about, this talk is yoga, writing, and life changes. But I was thinking about, for me, I've been practicing yoga for 30 years now, too. I've never pressed back into a down dog and been like, I am so done with this. I'm so bored. Right. Like, it has this parallel of just like, oh, the world is so fascinating, and the yoga world is so like the yoga mat is just a microcosm for life itself. Will you touch on that a little bit, about just your endless curiosity?
I mean, I get up almost every day, and even in my difficult and dark moments, I'm just excited by the world. It's just so mysterious, so interesting to me. And, writing is one way. It's not the only way, but writing is one way to learn about the world. There's a chapter in my favorite yoga book is called The Heart of Yoga. And there's a chapter heading in that. It has great chapter headings. One of them is Things That Darken the Heart. But the one that I really love is The World Exists to be Seen and Discovered. Mm. And just that notion of there's just so much out there to discover. And to the extent that we can remind ourselves to stay curious, things get easier. It's like when things are driving you crazy, things are making you sad, things are just too much to comprehend. For me, it's just helpful to step back and go, what's actually going on here? What is going on here? And you may not have an answer, but even being able to ask the question just turns the temperature down on that boiling pot a little bit.
What are your other favorite yoga books?
I like Eric Schiffman's book, Moving into Stillness. Donna Farhi's basic book on yoga, I think, is really, really good. It's just got great explanations of the poses, enough of the philosophy. I've got a ton of them, but those are the ones that come to mind. Is just straightforward useful.
And constantly go back,
Yeah.
dog-eared copies.
Yeah. What about you? Do you have a favorite?
Yeah, Judith Lassiter, Living Your Yoga, that white book.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I like that book a lot. I like Donna Farney's book too, a lot. All right, the other part of our three for here, yoga, writing, and life changes. So if you think about life changes, and everyone in this room, we're all experiencing them all the time, but top stressors are usually death, divorce, job loss, and moving. And I'm imagining there's probably several columns on all of those things, most of those things in your book. Do you find both your writing practice and your yoga practice, how do those help you facilitate a major life change?
Well, I will say in a specific and immediate way. I left the Tribune in June, and it has been, just on a purely practical, structure your day level, very helpful to me that I've continued to have my Saturday Zoom class at Yogaview, and that I go to the DePaul Theater School twice a week to teach, Get up, get dressed, go into a space with young, active, diverse people, and, have to do something. So in that practical way, yoga has helped me through this life change here. One thing about a yoga practice or any, I don't think a yoga practice, sometimes I worry about framing it just as yoga, right? Because you could have a walking practice. You could have a prayer practice. Just something that is a retreat on a regular basis from the perturbations of the world, from your screens, that allows you to calm down and breathe and just go inside for a minute. I got lost in that thought. I was going somewhere with that, but I don't remember where.
Well, I like what you're saying about the practice. I agree that it doesn't, like a yoga practice isn't necessarily just the physical practice, but like a breathing practice. Even like making tea, like I just love the ritual of making tea. Just like, my husband's like, oh, you can do it you can get the hot water from here. I'm like, no, I want to fill the pot. I want to listen to it come to a boil. I want to hear the whistle. Like I like the whole ritual of it. So something that kind of just separates you for a moment to take, just to give it your attention. So we were talking about life changes and how you can become just swept up and overcome by that, but how certain practices will maybe allow us to step away.
Yeah, it's the practice of stepping away. Whether you call it yoga, whatever you want to call it. And just one thing I'm about to turn 68, and I was talking with a young colleague who's in her early 30s just this morning, and I find myself sounding like a really old person a lot. Let me tell you, when you're my age. But, just reminding her, and also reminding myself, is that life is always going to be hard in some way. One thing about reaching 68 is that you just know that, right? You're not waiting anymore for life to be perfect, because you know that difficult things are going to happen. And then if you're lucky, you get a little space, a little ease in there for a while. But it's just for a while. And so you appreciate it all the more because it's for a while. But the more you can understand that whatever's going on in your life, if you can just pull away from it, take the walk, do the yoga, make the tea without earbuds in, even the hard things get a little easier, a little easier.
My kids joke around, I can sleep anywhere, and I think it's from like years of practicing yoga and lying in Shavasana. Like I'm super comfortable, you know, laying on any floor, and I can be in any shape, in any situation. I'm just going to close my eyes for a moment and take a mini Shavasana. Like I just like, it's just training, just like over and over and over again to be able to just have a little reprieve for a moment.
I do think, I mean, Shavasana is an interesting thing. One of the young students in my class, after a couple classes, said, he goes, you know, in Shavasana my mind is just racing all the time. And I said, yeah, of course it is, because this is new for you. With some luck, if you do this over and over and over, and it has gotten easier for him. And so just the act of Shavasana, just lying down in a quiet space, and the first however many times having your mind go, no, 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 I gotta get up, I gotta go do something, I can't tolerate this, it's too quiet in here, it's too noisy in here. You know, just learning that, it does get easier then to just lie down and take a brief recess and come back.
All right, speaking of giving advice, you have a very famous column about wearing sunscreen, about like basically a commencement speech. And I didn't know this about you, but do one thing every day that scares you. I thought it was on a Lululemon bag, and that's where I... Mary, this is big.
Don't get me started on Lululemon.
Yeah.
Sometimes I wander around yoga class adjusting people, and I'll look down at the Lululemon bags and I'll see several things I wrote on them.
Really? There's several? Oh my God.
That's all I can say.
The story, though, that surrounds like that quote is, will you tell the story?
Yeah, I mean, some of you may remember that I wrote, I was walking along the lake. It was my third column of the week. It's the end of May, and I saw this young woman sunbathing, and I thought, oh, sure hope she's wearing sunscreen, because I didn't at that age, and it shows. And then I started thinking, well, you know, it's graduation time. I could write a mock graduation speech. Why not? Got to the Tribune, got myself some M&Ms and a cappuccino, and spent a pleasant afternoon just thinking of, you know, things I'd like to say. I think I was 40 at the time, or 42. Things I would like to say to young people. And I wrote it and I left, and, you know, I thought at the time, wouldn't always walk away from a column thinking, hey, that was pretty good. But I walked away and I thought, I feel good about that. I liked that. That worked. And then it appeared in print in the Tribune and got some nice snail mail, because I don't think we even had Tribune emails then. I had an AOL account. We may have had Tribune emails, but very few people emailed in those days. 2 months later, I get an email from another journalist who said, you know, my sister in Denver just sent me this column, or no, just sent me Kurt Vonnegut's graduation address to MIT, but I remember reading this in your column, and it looks like you plagiarized. And if you didn't, you have a problem, and you better get on this right away. I laughed out loud. I went, what? And then I started hearing from other people. And then I went, oh, I do have a problem, don't I? And I thought, did I plagiarize? I mean, because, you know, you hear people going into black holes and, you know, when they plagiarize. But then I thought, no, I was walking to work along the lake, you know. And I started trying to find Kurt Vonnegut on a Friday afternoon in August. Finally, I tracked him down at his house in the Hamptons, and he answered his own phone. And I said, oh, Mr. Vonnegut, My name is Mary Schmich, and I write for the Chicago Tribune, and I wrote this thing, and he just laughed out loud, bark of a laugh, and he said, "Oh my God, it's you." You wrote that. And he said people have been calling him, asking for the rights. A Glamour magazine wanted to reprint it. His wife called him and said, "Honey, why didn't you tell me you gave the graduation speech at MIT?" And then eventually Baz Luhrmann, the movie maker, got a hold of it and turned it into a spoken word piece, and
it blew up.
It went on.
You went viral.
It went on from there.
It's an amazing story. Speaking of advice, what advice would you give to, for anybody that is like, I was thinking about starting yoga? What would you say?
I would say start. I would say, first of all, there's no one-size-fits-all yoga. So what I say to people when they say that is I say, go look for a studio. Look for an intro to yoga class. Maybe look for a level 1 class. But understand that if you go to a class and you don't like it, don't give up. You may have to try more than one to find what works for you. Because some people will go to a level 1 class. Level 1 means a million different things. Some people will find it too hard. Some people will find it too easy. Some people will love the teacher. Some people won't. It's like any relationship, Give it a little time, explore, and, see what works before you give up. What do you tell people?
Well, it's because I'm here and a manager here, and I end up talking to a lot of people. Plus, I'm a teacher, and so I have a lot of conversations with people who start yoga, and they'll take one class and they'll not have a great experience. A lot of people start yoga and don't have a great experience their first yoga class. And everyone starts for such different reasons. Right. But I think but what you're saying about not stopping, it would be like listening to one song and deciding that all music sounds like that one song. Right. When it's, just a rainbow out there. But, finding people that speak to you, finding people that you kind of hear them, you can speak their language, just kind of like you understand their cues. And I think it is interesting, and it's such an interesting thing now that we're doing so much on Zoom and this like very difficult hybrid that we're also teaching with both online and in person is I think teachers were being asked to do a lot right now. But you've done such a good job of being able to connect. I mean, I don't anymore, but I used to do the admin for your Zoom class, and just even watch. I learned so much from just watching at the beginning of your classes of making sure that it's like you're all in the same room. I used to call it. I described it as I feel like you're hosting a parlor, like that. You have people signing in from Paris and people speaking French at the beginning. I'm like, this is so cool! And just like, hey, say your name. And I think during the last 2 years, when it's been so difficult for people to connect because of COVID and whatever their situation was, you really aced it in terms of getting people to connect online and just feeling like, okay, well, this is the way we're doing it. And it seemed completely normal.
Well, it helps to have nice students like Michelle and Lauren and,
Right, that it's still
up for the challenge, and Peg and Mike back there.
That you can still build a community.
Right.
Your mom shows up a lot in your book, and I just spent the weekend with my mother, who went from an iPhone 6 to an iPhone 12, so it no longer has a home button. And it was like an entire day of watching.
I found that challenging too, Jenny.
Yeah, I did too, actually. I reminded myself I did too. But anyway, so when I was thinking about you all week and thinking about your mom really became like, I'm sure other people feel like they like sort of got to know your mom. You wrote about her so much. Was it helpful in your writing practice to move through that life change of losing your mom? Was it helpful to write?
I think it was. I don't think I understood while I was doing it how helpful it was to me to write about my mother's aging and eventual dying. I started doing it because I had to fill 3 column spaces a week, right? You know, and the first year I was writing a column, I think Mother's Day came around and went, oh, well, guess I'm going to write about a column about my mom. Mm-hmm. And she read it and she tolerated it, and then I went, well, now you're up for grabs, Mama. But it did. And one thing I learned from that, probably more than any other columns I've ever written, is the universality of grief. Everybody experiences it in some way. Many of us experience it with our mothers. Not everyone. People have different relationships with their parents. But to watch your mother get old and grow weak and then die is an experience that many of us in this room, I'm sure, have gone through. And so I realized early on that in writing about my mother, yes, there was some cathartic process for me, but I was always careful to make it clear that I understood that this was not just about me. It was not just about my mother. It was about many of us.
It was a great segue for what you thought maybe you would read today.
You want me to read? Okay.
I want her to read.
So Jenny asked me if I would read a column, and I didn't know what to read. I said, well, maybe I'll read something about Thanksgiving, since we're coming up on Thanksgiving, and I have a section in here called Holidays. And I was skimming through it, and I realized, oh, the column that gave me the title for this book was a Thanksgiving column. I'd completely forgotten that. So the very long title of the book is Even the Terrible Things Seem Beautiful to Me Now. And now in my real life, I am not a crier, but I find sometimes that when I read aloud, I do get a little teary, so you'll have to put up with me. This is from Sunday, November 21st, 2010. My mother once said something that has played over and over in my mind in the few months since she died, and I hear it strongly as we get closer to Thanksgiving. Even the terrible things she said on a sunny day in what would be her last September seem beautiful to me now. I rarely saw my mother cry, despite the many reasons she might have. But on that afternoon in her backyard, she cried a little, tears that I sensed were equally for the beauty and the sorrow in her life, and for the recognition that when it's all done, beauty and sorrow are one and the same. Even the terrible things seem beautiful to me now. What she was saying that day, I think, was that it's all life. The things that hurt your heart, wound your pride, drain your hope, leave you lost, confuse you to the point of madness. That's life. Life with its endless shifting sensations and its appalling urgency and its relentless drive toward mystery. What could be better than that? What could you be more thankful for than that? At Thanksgiving, there's a lot of talk about gratitude, a word that has been so merchandised on calendars and coffee mugs and in self-help manuals that when you hear it, you may want to reach for the hand sanitizer to wipe away the goo. In the commercial version of gratitude, life is filled with cozy meals, cozy weather, friends and relations who smother each other in hugs and greeting cards. To the extent that hard times figure in, it's only once they've been vanquished and can be toasted farewell with a glass of premium wine facing a perfect sunset. It's easy to be grateful for such easy pleasures. Who can complain about cozy meals and friends who put up with your annoying behaviors? But to see beauty in the terrible things and to be grateful for those moments, that's an elusive art. I think you have to be old to see how beautiful the terrible things are, my mother said that afternoon. And I think she's right. Maybe we can't see the beauty in the terrible things until we're approaching the final beauty and terror. In other words, death, the ultimate proportion gauge. Maybe only when you take your last step back from the canvas can you see how gorgeous all those wrong strokes and smudges look when viewed together. All of the best times in my life have grown directly out of the worst times. What feels like manure often turns out to be fertilizer. But what I took from my mother's remark wasn't just that good may grow out of bad. It's that the bad is its own beauty. We all resist what's difficult and painful. We run from it. We curse it. It comes anyway, as inevitable as weather. Most of us have gone through at least one time in our lives that we would call terrible. Everyone I know certainly has. A disease, a rape, a parent's suicide, the death of someone you love, the collapse of a dream. These are things you would never wish on anyone, just as I would never have wished for my mother some of what befell her. But as we approach Thanksgiving, I'm more grateful than ever to her for the way she helped everyone around her understand that the hard times make you whole. They make you play the entire keyboard. They allow you to experience the full range of the most basic thing we give thanks for: being alive.
It's funny that you reference hand sanitizer.
I know, I thought about that too.
Little did we know that would play such a big role the last couple of years. Thanks for reading that. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask Mary? You must.
I just see a hand back there.
Yes.
I appreciate you so much, and I've been reading your poems for years, and I wonder with all the changes at the Tribune and how can people like me support you now? You know, I see that you still write on Facebook, and I love that, and I feel really fortunate that I'm able to still follow you, but I also worry about you and like some of your counterparts, like Heidi Stevens too, and people that I have admired and read for years, and with all these changes recently, I just wonder, like I so appreciate, you know, being able to read your voice, you know, your voice is so important. So my question is, how can someone like me support you and your counterparts that are still writing, but, you know,
Yeah, well,
or can we?
thank you for the impulse to do that. I don't have a really good answer for that, you know. For me, I was ready to stop that way of writing anyway. You know, all the people who left were in slightly different life positions. I don't know, you know. It's really not something I think that individually people in this room can deal with. There's just this cosmic shift in how newspapers and publications and media work now. And I worry about the future for the kind of voices that the Tribune, you know, for so long was able to share. I mean, on the one hand, everybody can have a voice now. We've all got Facebook and Twitter and Substack and, you know, and all of this stuff, but we are losing what I call the connective tissue of newspapers, where you had some voices and you knew the columns were fact-checked. You knew that this wasn't just opinion, that, you know, that there were some standards that people had to adhere to. It's just all changing so fast. I don't know, but thank you, and I'll see you on Facebook.
Would you ever write another book?
Well, that's a collection of columns. You know, I'm one of those writers who, you know, as much as I claim to hate deadlines, I would never have written anything without them. So until somebody gives me a book deadline, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm new to yoga. I haven't practiced it, so I'm interested in knowing that should you read a book about yoga before you start practicing? I never even thought about doing that, so that you even know the terms of these poses that are presented to you, and so I found that kind of interesting. Again, I hope that you can put the names of the books that you're recommending, if you think that that would be a good idea for someone who's just starting. And then to piggyback on this girl said back here, I look forward to seeing you at Songs of Good Cheer at the Old Town. And it's not I'm not plugging you, I am plugging you.
Oh, thanks for the plug.
It's a marvelous Christmas,
well, that's
joyful
great.
time. I'm so glad
It's happening?
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, if you haven't gotten tickets yet, Eric Zorn, my former Tribune colleague, and I, this is our 23rd year, we started doing this holiday sing-along with some great musicians at the Old Town School of Folk Music. We were up to 6 live shows before the pandemic. Last year we did it virtually. This year we're going back into the school. Singers have to be masked. I mean, the audience has to be masked, got to be vaccinated, but we're doing it, and tickets are selling pretty well. People want to come back, you know, and be together, and the music's fantastic, not because of me and Eric, but because the musicians are really, really good, and just to sing those songs together. So,
what do you think about yoga in books? Good place to start?
You know, it couldn't hurt. People learn so differently, right? If you're a book person, a book learning person, and you wanted to read up on it first, why not? You know, I think mostly, though, I would say, you know, go to class and try to experience it in your body, and don't try to overthink it before you've moved through it some.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. There's so much available. Clearly you can Google anything, and you can do a lot of things online, but until I think there's a certain change that happens when a teacher's holding space, and there's a kind of a threshold as a student that you cross, being in the same space as someone who is leading that practice and able to offer you some suggestions and some hints and things. I have a neighbor who, we have a block party in my neighborhood, and I've lived in that house for 20 years, and every block party, he's like, Jenny, I'm going to make it to your class. I'm like, okay. I think his name's Tom. Like, Tom, for 16 years, you've been telling me, like, you just got to go. Like, just go.
Maybe I should know the answer to this question, but actually it's 2 questions. Did you ever write a column about yoga, or about?
Good question.
Did you write a column specifically about yoga or teaching yoga or how yoga applies to life? No. And then my other question / suggestion is maybe in the same model of your book is a collection of columns. Maybe you could write a book that is based on a collection of your classes you taught online. You could even call it "Let Go of Something You Don't Need."
That's one of my favorite phrases in my yoga class, right? An interesting concept. No, you know, interestingly enough, You're the second person in 2 days who asked me that. The guy who runs Agate Publishing, which publishes this book, I was talking to him a couple of days ago, and he said, I didn't even know this about you until fairly recently, that you were so into yoga. He said, I've read many, many of your columns, and I never heard you mention it. Did you write about it? And I said, no. And it was a subconscious / conscious decision just to keep this part of my life to me. It's like I was just out there with so much. I mean, certainly not everything, but I wanted my yoga practice to stay private. I didn't want it to be transactional. I didn't want it to be using it in any way,
It's really beautiful.
Even though, using it could have meant sharing it, but sharing it with whom, for what, it was mine.
Mia?
What are you excited about in your future? What's on the horizon? Bucket list? Are you traveling? What are you doing?
I got no bucket list. I am enjoying resting. It is such an unusual feeling. I don't think I've ever rested in my life. And it's kind of cool. Though it hit me yesterday, I think maybe I'm moving into a new phase. So these months since I stopped, they've been I've been doing a lot, but in ways that feel restful, in this rare way. I also think I'm beginning to process my life, which is an interesting thing. Most of the time we're just living it, running through it. I processed a lot just by writing, but I just find myself reflecting now, and I feel less need to do, which is not to say no need to do. I keep thinking about this poem by Raymond Carver that he wrote. I don't know if you know him. He was mostly a fiction writer, but he also wrote poems. And he had cancer, and sometime fairly shortly before he died, he just wrote a poem about getting up in the morning, making his coffee, and going out to watch the boats. And the last line is something like, to wait and see what happens. And that's how I feel right now. I'm just and kind of looking out at the world and waiting to see what happens without a rush to grab it or to make it happen. It's like, I'm just going to wait and see for a little bit.
A question about, throughout your whole profession, the creative profession and writer's block, the idea of the blank piece of paper, is it even people that are very successful, would you say that you yourself could experience that writer's block often, and what would you do, and other people within the Tribune?
I am someone, as I said earlier, if I had not had these deadlines, I would have lived, but wanted to write, I would have lived in a permanent state of writer's block. One of my mantras is deadlines crowd out doubt. Writer's block is all about doubt, right? Panic is my muse. There would be days that I would wake up and I would just think, I can't today. I just can't. I got nothing. And that's when I would do some yoga or take a walk. And then I would calm down and I would realize that this would not be the day that I would tell my editor I couldn't do it. And then I'd just do it. So I know writers who don't have any writer's block, but I do, and I would have suffered mightily through my life if I had not had just the reality of deadlines. So I have no idea what that means for the future.
Just jump back to the previous question about now that you're done with the situation. I'm about your age, I'm still working. You know, for 35, 40 years I've been go, deadline. And frankly, retiring terrifies me right now. So I don't know if you have any suggestions, or maybe it's yoga, maybe it's stepping back. I don't know what I'm gonna do when I retire. Because I've been working so much.
Right, I know. And I was scared, even though I knew it was time. There was just something in me that said, it is time. Trust your instinct that it is time. But I was fearful. I thought, I'm going to have an identity crisis. I'm going to wake up in the mornings not knowing what to do, not knowing who I am, having lost all value in the world. You know, and I would say to my friend Eric Zoen, I said, look, we have to adjust to the fact that we are going to go through a period of mourning. But the morning hasn't come yet, and it may still. I am aware that it still may. It's one thing to leave your job when it's summer in Chicago. It's another thing to face an unemployed winter. So we'll see how that goes. But, and again, people are different. But I think there's a good chance that you will find that you'll be okay.
We'll do one more. There's someone in the back, yeah.
I'm also a huge fan and really miss your voice. I'm not on Facebook, but as a professional writer, do you continue to journal? And do you think that's helpful where you're writing things that are just for you as opposed to a public voice?
You know, I stopped keeping a regular journal years ago, though I started again during the pandemic because I just needed to get something out, right? And I've done a little of it since I left the Tribune. I actually bought the book and I wrote Tales of My Transition, and I almost never write in it. I'm too busy. But, you know, I do think that writing stuff down can be helpful. For me, I mean, yesterday, for example, I went into my little guest room / yoga room, and I started doing some yoga, and I thought, I'm going to go write in that journal that I never write in. And so I did. And that did for me what I needed to have done yesterday afternoon. So, did that answer your question?
It's interesting that you have these things in your life that you're able to step back, you know, that self-awareness to step back and take what you need, whether it's a walk, whether it's writing in your journal, whether it's some yoga.
Right, and it is stepping back. But I want to say that I understand that having the means, the time to step back is a luxury, and that there are, you know, for many people that luxury is very difficult to find. For some people in this room it may be difficult to find. But that I think you can also find just smaller ways to step back, even if you don't have the time that I currently have to step back, that just closing your eyes.
Mini Shavasana.
Yeah, mini Shavasana. Walking outside. When I would get really stuck on deadline and think, okay, I started but I can't finish, that's what I'd do. I'd just get up, walk around, a couple minutes, sit back down, and all of a sudden the sentence that I couldn't find was there. So just finding, just the small moments, doesn't always have to be the big thing. Just the small retreat, the stepping back, the closing your eyes, the walking around, taking a few conscious breaths, the pause, the pause, the pause.
Mary, thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you for taking the time to.
Thanks, everybody. There's some tea up front. If anyone would like a cup of tea, there's some cookies. Please eat them. Otherwise, we're going to eat them all.
And I'm very moved and pleased that you all came and that you sat on bolsters and wore your masks. So,
and
thank you.
If you
really
want a book, if you want Mary to sign your book, I'm going to make her come sit up front. So if you